Hello and welcome to ET Auto. It's my pleasure to welcome to this episode, to welcome you to this episode of Startup Adda, a station for innovation, as we would like to call it. Today, I'm stepping in for my colleague Nabil Khan. Uh, as the name suggests, Startup Adda is a platform for startups, innovators to share their stories, strategies at length, and also discuss the possibilities of shaping a robust future for the startup ecosystem, the industry, and thereby for the country as well. And we also have industry experts in every episode to review and also maybe help refine these stories. Ladies and gentlemen, today's guest is Shreyas Shibulal. He's the founder director of Micelio Mobility, and he's an engineer and entrepreneur with a deep-seated love for automobiles. A holder of a master's degree in embedded systems from the University of Pennsylvania, Shreyas has an interest in the automotive sector. Uh, he nurtures this interest since his childhood and also has a passion for clean mobility, which drove him to start the Micelio journey. Micelio has an interesting profile and positioning in the startup space. It's a player focused on nurturing the EV ecosystem as an investor. That's how it started this journey. It started the journey with a fund of, as an investor, with a fund of about 150 crore rupees, and it's also building a community of startup players who, by offering hardware and software support, it also has a last mile uh, cargo logistics service provider, and also plans to be an EV player itself. So, and in this episode, we would also have Mr. Ashok Bhasan, a global C-suite leader and advisory board member at Blue Smart, as the industry expert. He will join us in some time, but right now, let's get to know more about the Micelio mobility story from Shreyas. Welcome to the show, Shreyas.
Thank you, Samantha, for the introduction, and thank you for having me.
Let's to begin. Quite an interesting name, Micelio Mobility. Quite unusual as well. So, what's the story behind this name?
So, Micelio is Spanish or Italian for mycelium, and mycelium is basically the basic geometry that you see in nature, in any natural ecosystem. So, if you observe the roots of a tree, or if you observe, your body's own nervous system, you can see that it follows a very distinct basic geometry. And we found a lot of resonance with that because our goal and our vision and our mission was really to catalyze the EV ecosystem in India to kind of bring about this next transition into electric mobility.
Interesting, interesting. Talking about the helping the transition to mass scale electric mobility. I was reading about Micelio, and it says that it is Micelio is tech driven and aims to facilitate uh, a long term social change. And your website also says electrifying the mobility sector responsibility responsibly. So, could you explain this in detail? I mean, as of date, what are the opportunities you see to realize this aim?
So, of course, when we look at catalyzing the ecosystem, there are multiple stakeholders. First and foremost, we're focusing on the startup ecosystem. And I think working in the electric mobility space, there's already an inherent aspect of social impact because we're transitioning away from dirtier forms of mobility while working towards clean mobility. So I think that's kind of the way that we see kind of engaging with the ecosystem.
Uh, I mean, if I look at it, the way it appears to me is that Micelio Mobility has uh, a four-pronged approach, or rather maybe four pillars on which you want to build your story. So one is as an investor, one as a community builder, providing support to emerging startups, one as a logistics service provider, and then eventually also becoming an EV player yourself. So
Right.
in these, if you look at these four pillars, I would think the first one is it has matured or advanced fairly well. Could you tell us your journey as an investor in the EV space?
Sure. So, the Micelio Fund was our first initiative. As you rightly mentioned, that's where it started. So the fund is focusing on early stage startups in the electric vehicle space,
How big is the fund, by the
predominantly.
way?
Sorry, I, I,
How
I
big is
don't
the
think I
fund?
got the corpus is $20 million, and we've received over 400 applications. It was established in 2019, and we've made five investments so far. So we made four last year, we made one this year. So our pace in terms of investments have increased significantly. And as I mentioned, we've seen more than 400 applications, which is a fairly large database. And the deal flow in this space has in India has really only exponentially increased in the last couple of years. So we're definitely seeing a lot of traction.
Indeed, the flow of funds has grown exponentially, as you rightly said, leading to some, based on someone would say even a crazy valuations of some entities. But interesting. That's we'll discuss about the valuation topic also. But in terms of your own journey as a startup providing EVs or logistics uh, service, which are again will have a fleet of EVs. You yourself would need a lot of investments, right? So, what kind of investments are you looking at?
So, as I mentioned, the fund corpus is $20 million. The other initiatives are self-funded. Just to give you an idea, we have our last mile logistics fleet operates more than a thousand EVs right now. So that should give you a kind of a broad idea in terms of the investments that we're putting into our own companies. Um, and with regards to the other initiatives, uh, which are our product development, which is probably a little bit too early in terms of being able to provide figures with in terms of investments. The Discovery Studio, of course, is more about building a facility and building a community. So I think that should probably maybe give you some idea in terms of what we have in mind in terms of investments into our own companies.
Interesting. I mean, it would help if you can quantify some of the what ballpark figure in terms of what kind of investments would be required into your own companies.
To be very honest, we don't disclose that out. We don't disclose those figures up front. But again, as I said, just to give you a ballpark figure, we have about a fleet of 1,000 vehicles so far.
Hmm.
An electric vehicle can cost anywhere between upwards of a lakh potentially.
Right.
Right, probably a little bit less as well. You can also get electric two-wheelers at the 70,000 kind of range as well.
Right. And
Yeah.
interesting, all these four pillars are interlinked, no? And talking about a Discovery Studio, which also offers a platform for emerging startups to incubate their stories, if you like. What kind of services do you offer under the Discovery Studio
So, so the
pillar?
idea behind the Discovery Studio was to create a product development facility for the EV startup community in India, and really mostly focus on early stage again, similar to the fund. And we host an array of both hardware and software housed in a physical facility to help startups get from ideation to prototype. And depending on the kind of startup, the EV ecosystem is vast. You'll see um, You'll see companies that are maybe just working on a software stack, which is relevant for charging infrastructure potentially. Or of course, you'll see like the vast majority of electric vehicle startups in India are predominantly hardware oriented. Um, and the idea is to really lower the barrier of entry to get into this space and to start innovating. So the idea is that this facility needs to be accessible. The other aspect of what we're doing with the Discovery Studio is also building a community of EV startups. So we have over 100 members so far. And this community building aspect is something that I believe a lot of the members of the Discovery Studio are finding a lot of value
Mm. And when it comes to your journey or journey which is yet to start as an EV maker yourself, how are you kind of preparing yourself? Because the electric vehicle industry globally, because of its inherent nature or advantage, as one may like to call it, of offering having a lower entry barrier, this whole EV industry compared to the conventional ICE vehicle industry. You see a lot of new players, mushrooming of EV OEMs, as one may call it. So in such a scenario, how are you preparing yourself to be able to kind of create your own space, your own identity, and with of course a focus of
here.
having a sustainably successful story.
So I'll take a step back and probably talk a little bit about how this idea that we should actually get into EV manufacturing, that's how we decided that's something we want to do. And I'll go back to the fund and the studio. With the fund and eventually the studio. The studio came out of the realization that it was not just enough to provide capital to companies. You actually had to do something more in terms of making a facility maybe accessible and also providing some guidance to these startups to actually make their ideas successful. And I think very similarly with our product development company, it came out of the realization that when we were running our last mile logistics fleet, and we were purchasing vehicles off the shelf, predominantly two wheelers, that there was probably a gap in the market for an electric vehicle suitable for the last mile logistics use case, specifically the two-wheeler form factor. And that's kind of where our product development company came from. Um, and, and while that's where it started with the two-wheel form factor, I think as a company, we want to focus on commercial use case. And right now, that means the logistics use case. And the idea is that, while yes, we want to be competitively priced in the market um, as for a two-wheeler, there's also there's also realization that these vehicles need to be able to perform and last much longer than the other vehicles as well. So there's always, of course, pricing is always relative, but we want to also offer a superior product for the use case.
So, in terms of the product development, now would it be a kind of proprietary technology and product development process, or would you like to partner with someone who holds expertise in those areas? And when it comes to application, the use case, as you said, it would be commercial use case, but the form factor would be initially two wheelers. So could you look at, let's say, three wheeler or maybe four wheelers also, so smaller commercial vehicles at a later stage?
So I think you asked two questions there, so I'll address each one. So the first question as to partnering with other players in this space. This vehicle has been built completely in-house, and we're manufacturing it in-house as well. But of course, in the future, we would of course be definitely open to building partnerships with other players in this space. And the other question about how we are tackling the commercial use case, yes, this is a two-wheel form factor. And I think as runway, yes, we would definitely want to get into other form factors in the future as well. Again, addressing commercial use cases and in probably the short to medium term kind of horizon, it means staying in the logistics space and
All
logistics
right.
use cases. Yeah.
I see. And what's the timeline you're looking at for to make the market foray with your own products?
So we I think definitely we can expect our vehicles to be on the road, sometime this year, and that will of course come with its own announcement, when we're ready.
Right. And on the logistics service providing logistics service business, which is called Lightning, right? If I'm not wrong.
Lightning Logistics, yes, yeah.
Yeah, Lightning Logistics. So right now you are in about you are said you have a fleet of about 1,000 EVs in about what about two cities that you have
So
your services in.
we have three cities. So we're operating in three cities. So we started in Bangalore in 2019. We've expanded to Chennai and Hyderabad. We service 13 clients so far, fairly large companies in the e-commerce, food and grocery, and the courier space.
Okay. And if you look at the timeline, let's say we are in early 2022. If you look at, say, the timeline of next 3 years or so by 2025, what's the expansion plan in this part of your business in terms of fleet size and market that you would like to reach
Yeah.
out to?
So I think definitely we've spent this much time learning a lot about this space with the vehicles which were available to us, and we are kind of moving from that learning phase to an expansion phase. So hopefully in you know the next year we should see at least a 3x expansion in our fleet is what we're thinking, expanding into more cities, servicing more clients. We started out with only two-wheelers. We also operate three-wheelers now. So expanding the three-wheeler fleet is also something that's in the horizon for us.
And one would maybe assume that you would have three wheelers or two wheelers in your logistics service business across brand. It's brand agnostic, right?
Yes, yes, it is brand agnostic now. We work with a few different OEMs to source our vehicles.
Okay,
Yeah.
interesting. And as you said, by next year, a 3x growth. That's also a reflection of how the EV industry is poised to grow, no? And both in the commercial and as well as personal segments grow exponentially in the coming
Mhm.
years. Uh, Now, coming back to your the pillar of no the business pillar of uh, Micelio Mobility as an investor. You know, there according to a report, there are about close to 500 EV startups in India, and as I said, Micelio itself has received over 400 applications for funding. How difficult or easy is the choice of party to invest in, and what are the key factors you look at to arrive at a decision?
So, beginning of last year, we had zero investments, right? So it took us almost 2 years to actually to make our first investment, and that too we've seen 400 plus applications. We've only made five. So we've been very cautious. Initially we're obviously looking for probably more co-investment opportunities, and then we started leading certain rounds. I think what I guess if you were to boil it down, the kind of key factors that we're looking into is especially in the Indian context, the fund is focused on Indian startups, and that naturally means that we're looking for some kind of application to the domestic market. And I think in that context, what it means is your ability to scale and scale sustainably. I think that's a very key factor, and your runway to actually get there. And the other thing is also the founding team. I think that's very important. Understanding how they're kind of fitting the different pieces of puzzle together in terms of people and skill sets, and actually working together to make that happen. So I would say those are two things that we're very keen on kind of establishing.
Okay, great. That's good to know. Uh,
Yeah.
no, Now it's time for us to welcome the industry expert for this episode of Startup Adda. And it's my pleasure and honor to welcome Mr. Ashok Hassan, who is an advisory board member at Blue Smart Mobility currently. In addition to being a mentor, a global C-suite leader, and a digital and EV evangelist, who has had a very successful and long journey as a professional himself, building brands and delivering growth across sectors and across geographies, including in the automotive sector, where during his stint at not only India's, but world's largest two-wheeler manufacturer, Hero MotoCorp. Mr. Basin, welcome to Startup Adda. And I now hand over the reins of this episode of the show to you to have to take the conversation ahead with Shreyas. Over to you, Mr. Basin.
Thank you, Samantha. Thank you for the warm introduction. Hello, Shreyas, and nice to be here with you, listening to your uh, great story. I would say the outline of the story. And first of all, I think thanks to ET Auto for the opportunity. I have engaged with startups before on this panel as well, and I think each one of them brings such a diverse but interesting approach to how things are being done. So we've had two-wheeler manufacturers, we've had charging infrastructure companies, we've had companies in goods carrying and delivery. But if I may say that the best all-rounder award for the concept before further jury discussion, CS goes to Micelio, because each one of them has begun to do a niche thing. I think the fact that you've gone for such a broad spectrum approach demonstrates at least two things clearly. One, the vision that you have and that your core team has, in recognizing that there is an opportunity at multiple ends of the value chain. So I think I compliment you on identifying that opportunity. The
Thank
second,
you.
I
Thank you
think,
so
is
much.
well placed courage, because as they say, if they were not pursued, then they would just say dreams. Real ambition is putting your money where your mouth is, and in this case, it's not just the $20 million that you're putting in the fund. I think it's also the resources that you're putting, intellectual, emotional, professional, entrepreneurial, uh, sort of shock absorbers that you're building for different components. So first of all, my huge compliments to you. I was aware that that is what you're doing, but listening to it firsthand on this program just now is compelling. I I would just come in from a perspective of maybe asking you a couple of things more from the perspective so that I can learn even more out of your story, and so that the audience which is on the call today with us, they get to understand uh, the brain behind Micelio, how you're thinking about it, how you're making some of the choices, and how you're looking at the journey ahead. So I'm going to build on what Samantro has already done. I think the first big thing that comes to my mind is that, and I know Samantro has just touched upon that, but if I may sort of uh, push push you a little bit more on that,
Mhm.
I think as compelling as the opportunities are at every end of the value chain, but to be able to significantly invest your entrepreneurial bandwidth, not just the dollars, uh, but dollars included, how are you looking at prioritizing between the different, shall I say, horses? Because each one of them is a compelling horse. I think the fund by itself can be a compelling horse. The fact that it is $20 million pretty much brought in from your own closed capital is by no means a limiting factor, because I know with your credentials and your commitment, you can swell up that fund significantly if you decided to go that path. So I don't think that dollars will remain finite there. So that's a very compelling horse. And you said you got 400 folks applying and you chose only five till now, which is so very good because you thought about it. And then the Discovery Studio, man, it's such a good thing, because I know some of your colleagues have talked to me about it in the past. And as I mentioned to you in our offline conversation, I'm looking forward to being at your Discovery Studio and at your lab. But it takes a village to make it happen. So I'm sure you have people who are working on the battery chemistry. There are people who are working on the battery management system. There may be people who are working on the motor, the people who are working on the drivetrain, and various things of an electric vehicle, two-wheeler farm, three-wheeler farm, four-wheeler farm. And now you have a real running business with a fleet of 1,000 vehicles on the road in three cities, Bangalore, Chennai, Hyderabad, working with several customers. And last but not the least, you are working on developing because you recognize, and I must say you're recognizing very correctly, that the manufacturing side of the supply chain of the business, if you want to be in the business, say, for example, of running a fleet of delivery vehicles, which is what you are in your in your horse number three, it is true that there is not enough and more strong alternatives of a suitable product format. And I love the way you described it, that keeping in mind the end use case, which is commercial in nature, keeping in mind the use cycle, keeping in mind the usage pattern. So I like the way you're thinking through the insights on that. You want to customize your products. Of the four babies that you have already shared with us, and if there are any more that are in the pregnant mode, which you're not revealing, we will not talk about them. But the four babies that are known to the world, how are you looking at the trade-offs? For sure, there is complementarity. For sure, there is learning. But brutally, are you seeing some more compelling than the others? 2 years out, 5 years out, is Shreyas going to be betting more on one? Or are you still keeping your options open? That's the first thing I want to understand more.
Sure. First of all, Mr. Basson, thank you so much for your very kind words. And I think your question is probably a little bit more industry agnostic, and it's more about time management and and my management style, perhaps. And of course, it is of course about kind of seeing where my priorities are. I think first and foremost, I think it's extremely important. We everything we did, we started out small and we wanted to build the fundamentals, right? And I think the fundamentals ultimately start with people. So hiring the right team to do to be very frank, a lot of the operational grunt work. Whereas I sit, of course, I do get very operationally involved, but a bulk of my responsibilities are kind of deciding how we move forward strategically, and that and I think my operational involvement in certain entities probably at different points of times probably vary depending on the need. To be honest, sometimes I would be very very much involved in one entity and probably take a little bit of a step back in some others depending on the need. And how I am prioritizing everything, I think it's you asked me to be brutally honest, so I'm going to be brutally honest. I don't think I can prioritize one over the other because I think again there's too deep a connection between at least if you look at the ecosystem side, we have the fund and the Discovery Studio, obviously because we're engaging with the startups. There's a lot of interplay there. And when you're looking at lighting logistics and a product development company, because both are in the logistics space and both are kind of feeding off each other in a lot of ways. A lot of the learnings that we came for what kind of vehicle that we should be building came from lighting logistics, and obviously lighting logistics will be consuming a lot of the vehicles that we will be manufacturing in the future. And also from if you're looking at it as say a portfolio of different companies, all of them come with different risks and different opportunities, right? And all of them, so it's hard. It's like it's almost like saying, can you prioritize equities over fixed income? It's like it's kind of like that because you need both, right? From that perspective.
Right. Nice to hear your commitment, and I particularly like the fact that upfront in your response you picked on uh, the critical jockey that is going to make the four horses run, which is apart from you, which is the talent that you would bring. And I think
Absolutely.
that talent really will act as the multiplier and and will add to the bandwidth. Culturally, are you seeing these? Because I do strongly believe that while in any company, culture is very critical, I know sometimes the popular belief is that in a startup, it's not about culture, it's about getting things done. But I am, you can say, of the school that believes that in startup, once again, it goes back to the first principles, which is solving a problem for the customer. I think that is the first principle. So whether it is a B2B or a design development or logistic, whichever product segment or service segment, it's about the customer. And the second thing is ultimately it will be about talent and people. And how these come into play together is about the culture, because the culture, as they say, you know, can eat strategy for, breakfast or
Lunch.
whatever.
Yeah.
So how are you thinking culturally? What are the common themes across the four streams, and how are these microcosms culturally different? Are you trying to make them different in some way because they are doing different things? Talk about that a little bit. It's the softer piece. It's not the $20 million, but I can tell you that is what will make the difference between the 20 million, which will become 200 billion, I'm sure, one day under your leadership. So talk about the culture piece and the.
So it's interesting. I think obviously culture is driven by values, and I think there are some very underlying values that we all align with. I mean, throughout the group of companies. Of course, by the nature of the space that we're in, we've decided to look at cleaner mobility, because I wouldn't say the technology that's available to us is completely clean either. But we're kind of moving in the direction, and to be as clean as possible is something that we endeavor to do. And also, I think the other thing I would say that I would say that there are for each entity, of course, getting everyone to align to a certain culture, certain set of values, is its own challenge. But I would say that there are probably certain differences in the culture, for each entity, and I think that comes from um, understanding who your end user or who your customer is, or who's at the center of what you're doing. Right, for the fund and also for the Discovery Studio, it is startups, because that's who we're engaging with. Of course, the vision is that what we're doing will catalyze the ecosystem to bring India to a certain place with regards to EV technology. But at the end of the day, that comes by making startups successful. And I would say with Lightning Logistics and with the product company, with Lightning Logistics, it is about the customer, but it's also about the rider, right? And providing equity for them, or providing something meaningful for them in terms of a career, in terms of economic empowerment. And also with the product company, it's the same kind of ethos, because what we're building is essentially a tool for livelihood, right? Especially with this vehicle. We're because the gig economy has expanded so rapidly. I mean, it's always been large in India, people know that, but it's expanded so rapidly. So that culture, it does come from, and which is why I'd say everywhere it's slightly different, but it's about who's kind of at the center of what you're trying to do as a company.
So the first principles of the customer as it applies to that segment, and the
Right.
first principles of not just the customer to whom you're selling, but other stakeholders like your rider in this case,
Right.
or your incubating companies, or your investee companies. Those are also stakeholders. So balancing the different stakeholders becomes extremely critical.
Right.
Uh, Wonderful. Tell me about the whole piece. You've already touched a broad spectrum. So you're into investing, you're into designing, you're into uh, incubating, you're then running the vehicles as well, which both gives you learning for product development as well. But the one thing that pops up in a big way uh, in the clean mobility space is the raw material called energy, and the energy as it is delivered through the charging infrastructure, as it is called, whether it is swapping, slow, fast, high, big, single, multiple. Uh, how are you thinking about that, and how did you resist yourself from participating in that, where on that drop of honey, every possible bee is coming, right? Everybody wants to be in the charging business. How have you thought about it, since it is a critical
So,
component of the value chain?
so Mr. Basson, I wouldn't say that I've completely resisted because if you look at least, I think at least three out of the four, three out of the five companies that we invested in the fund, they are definitely in that space. I think, you know, it's so there are two parts for energy. There's obviously clean energy generation, which is maybe not what this conversation is about, but also the energy deployment, right? I think it's definitely maybe something that we'll have to address eventually. We believe that for the commercial use case, large scale deployment was not necessarily something that uh, would necessarily be in our interest because deployment of charging infrastructure or deployment of energy outlets in a commercial use case can be by and large centralized, right? So for us, that was not really of course in the kind of consumer use case, of course I think charging infrastructure is enormously important, and also definitely in some commercial use cases. But I think we were focusing on use cases where the charging infrastructure would be centralized. So that's something that we that we're definitely cognizant of, but right now we have not decided to tackle that. And I guess that goes back to the deeper question of why we decided to look at commercial use cases versus the personal mobility. And I think I honestly believe that the transition to electric mobility will start definitely with larger fleets of vehicles, be it two or three wheelers or larger commercial vehicles, because that's really where people will see economies of scale. You can't expect everyone to be an eco warrior or a green warrior. At the end of the day, people will want to see unit economics get better, and that's ultimately what's going to motivate them. So I do believe that the commercial use cases, in this case, kind of logistics fleets, is where the transition is going to happen first before we see large scale adoption in kind of the consumer use case.
Right. How are you thinking through the asset ownership model? Say, for example, the last mile delivery uh, part of the business that you have, which is 1,000 vehicles, and you have the rider. So, is the fleet sort of centrally owned by your company, and then you are giving it to the rider? How's that? Because they are a critical stakeholder in delivering success of delivery, right? So, how are you working through that, and how are you differentiating
So
yourself?
yeah, sure. So, our service is, complete vehicle plus a rider. So that's the service we provide. So we don't just lease out vehicles. We provide we provide the vehicle plus a rider for our customer, right? And we did start out with the asset heavy model. That is where we started, and we've kind of transitioned to a lease model now. So we work with multiple lessors to lease vehicles from them. Of course, yeah. So that that I hope that answers your question.
Right, right. So obviously, you're incubating several. You've already launched some. I'm sure uh, with all your good leadership, each one of them has the opportunity to entrench eventually. And I always say that it starts with the people, and but ultimately, if you're customer focused and you have the talent, everything else can be solved. The only important thing to remember, which I see shades of in what you say, and I appreciate you for that, is thinking through the unit economics, thinking through the viability, because the sustainability is not just clean energy. Sustainability is of the business itself, and the business cannot be sustainable if the economics is not being thought through. So the commercial aspects, whether it is of the fleet, the ownership, the rider, the usage, the cycles, number of cycles of usage, etc., is concerned, those are very, very important aspects. Are you looking at some big collaborations outside the startup system or in the startup system in some core areas? For example, uh, it is quite sort of popularly agreed that the whole battery space actually defines the critical cost of the EV. And in that battery space, there is obviously the raw material, there is the cells, the packs, the chemistry, and all of that stuff. So, are you looking at some big collaborations there in terms of either design or in terms of commercializing? Because that is going to impact the cost, also keeping the Indian tropical conditions in place. And then, the government's PLI of $450 billion, and out of that, almost $181 billion, I think, just for the advanced chemistry solutions for the battery, and huge opportunity for India, sort of, to do something big there and not just depend on China and other places. How are you thinking through that? And the last thing, which I would state right now in the interest of time, is while closing the answer on that, if you want to say something, if you had the wish list to sort of write to the PMO or the Nirmala Sitharaman madam who's going to announce a budget, what are the 2, 3 things that you would ask? So I turn it over back to you. Cheers.
Yeah, so I think I think to answer your first question about energy systems and potential collaboration in that space. If you look at that ecosystem, we have the skill set definitely to we indigenously we have the enormous, I would say, yeah, people who have the skill set to actually do battery pack design, especially on the BMS side. What we are perhaps missing a little bit is cells, battery cells being locally manufactured, right? I think
Right.
us as a company, on the product development side, we definitely want to focus on bringing kind of core technologies such as powertrain energy systems in-house. But where we would obviously be open for collaboration is sourcing of cells, which is proven to be extremely critical for everyone in this space. And I think as far as a wish list, I'll keep it very generic because I have a lot of ideas regarding the wish list. But I would say, supply side incentives for companies in the electric vehicle space, and that could be in many forms. But of course, but I think that's broadly what my wish list would be.
Well thought. Wishing you success with the basic geometry of Micelio and all the success. Looking forward to meeting you again. Let me turn it over back to Sumantro for him to take it forward. But exciting to hear about everything you're doing and why and how. The why and the how are very important. And I see purpose and I see a deep commitment on the how part of it. So, congratulations. Back to you,
Thank
Sumantro.
you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Bassett. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vasan. As you rightly said, purpose is at the basis of all, and it serves the a very good purpose in terms of kind of the helping the build the story. And but Mr. Vasan, very crisply, what is a final assessment of the Micelio mobility story, as you've heard and discussed today?
Pregnant with success.
Okay.
Expect twins and expect more than that. I think very good approach, good vision, well started. I think the key challenge is always going to be prioritizing, but I really compliment Shreyas on the vision and on the approach. And yeah, I think pregnant with success, great space, great start.
That's a very superb remark there, Shreyas. But now you have to deliver the success story. And as Mr. Basan says, twins, if not more. And Mr. Basan, before I let you go, are there any learnings or wisdom, if you like, that you have gained during your own journey of close to about 35 years, working in various geographies with various organizations, some of them large global organizations, which you would like to share with Shreyas and also our audience, many of whom may be from the startup space?
Thank you. I think I'll keep it very simple. I will borrow Shreyas's explanation of basic geometry, and I think in the basic geometry, the principles. I think the first principles, regardless of which geography, which country, which business, in global roles across sectors that I worked, it is about who the consumer is. Any business, for it to become sustainably successful, must solve a problem for the consumer. So solve a problem. Don't just impose a solution. Solve a problem. If people are going to get faster, better, cheaper, cars are going to run less, environment is going to be better, people will get better unit economics, delivery will happen faster, the rider will have less pain of asset ownership, etc., 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 etc. So I think the first principles of focus on the consumer. The second piece is, I think, what has been becoming more and more critical, it has been evolving, and I think it is at a compelling inflection point, is today it is not just about one constituency. Earlier, the single minded obsession with the consumer could last you for a long time, and you could take the other stakeholders, whether it was employees or investors, because most companies were closely held, at a baseline level and keep doing. Today, in the startup world, in any case, to start with, the money is not going to be of the founder. Conventionally, if you see, say, in the Indian context, the companies have been owned by promoters, right? Most often they owned the company, they promoted the company, they ran the company, they did an IPO, maybe diluted 25%. In most companies, I'm saying. But now the stakeholder management is going to become extremely critical. And that stakeholder management is the investor. That stakeholder management is the retail investor when you do the IPO. That stakeholder management is the environment. And I think in the context of clean mobility, the public private partnership can be taken to a whole new level. And I didn't touch upon that with Shreyas during his section. So I think first principles of customer, know your customer, solve a problem, focus on unit economics, and make sure there is a balanced delivery for the stakeholders of all kinds, and never miss the purpose. And ultimately, the key vehicle will always be people, 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 people. Whether it is a team of 11, it's a team of 11,000, or it's a team of 111,000 in companies that I've worked. I think it's about that. So those are the 4 or 5 key things. None of this is new, but I think they are so cardinal that even at the cost of repeating, I'm stating the obvious. And you may say, what was the fun of asking this gentleman who's worked 3 decades? But I think I really mean what I say. And I say this to all the companies that I advise.
Indeed. And the two keywords that I take here are both start with P, people, and purpose. Of course, very no, well summed up there, Mr. Vasin. But before I let you go, one last
And
question.
we can have planet and profitability becomes the 4 P's then.
Yes, people, purpose, planet, and
And
profit.
sitting in the purpose should be balancing planet and profit both. The purpose must have it. Must be good
Right.
with your people, must be good for the planet, and must make money for the investors. So sorry to interrupt. Yeah.
No, right said there, Mr. Basan. Mr. Basan, since Startup Adda is all about startups, we discuss nothing but startups. What is your take on the current trend of valuation of startups across sectors, especially in the EV space? Some of them defy logic.
I don't want to comment on any case specific, but I think it's the good news and bad news. The bad news is that some of this snowballing of valuations that we are seeing in various companies, investor rounds, etc., may not be as well founded as it needs to be to my diligent mind or my approach. And that, therefore, I think may be sending a misplaced signals to various startup founders and founding team. My message to them will be, feel confident, feel positive, but don't be carried away by the euphoria, uh, because in some cases, it may be pass the parcel game from one round to the next between 2 investors or 4 investors. And that ultimately is not value creation, it is just valuation. So be watchful of that, don't get carried away. But to the extent that you need money or you can raise money, go ahead and raise money even more than what you need to keep your war chest ready. But please be frugal in your spending. Spend the pennies as if you had no pounds. The drops make the ocean. Small actions make big difference. So raise the funds. Don't get the valuation get to your head. If you're winning with the customer, if you're winning with the customer repeat day in, day out, if they're repeating, they're willing to pay you price premium, pricing power. If you're building the right model with your rider, the asset owner, or the person who's delivering who's carrying the delivery, or your consumer who's actually taking a ride in your clean mobility car, then you're going to make money. Be frugal, focus on the unit economics. Even if you're not making the profit today, please look at the P&L, the unit economics, the line of curve, and manage cash like a true Marwadi. Manage cash like a true Marwadi. Even if you have $1 billion in the chest, don't just throw it across the balcony. After that, obviously, there is a lot of proliferation taking place today. Every sector, every course is getting too many horses. I don't think all will survive. But I think the winners, first of all, it won't be the winner takes it all. I think there will be more than one winner in every space. But the winners will be the ones who will focus on the customer relentlessly, who will focus on unit economics, and who will balance all their stakeholders, and who will raise funds but not spend them recklessly is very, very, very critical. And of course, being agile, learning, experimenting, measuring, all of those are table stakes, I think. But yeah, it's a very exciting time for starters because there is a lot of funds coming their way, but they must know. And I think in some way, if I may say, if I may not be very popular, but it is also sometimes important at a certain stage to not only raise the money but also see whom you're raising it for and whom you're raising it from. Because the mindset of a person like Shreyas could be very different from somebody else who may be able to write a check equal to or bigger than him. I think we have to choose what mindset of investors am I bringing in, what value will they bring, what freedom will they leave with me. That's very important. Like they say, the color of money is important. I think the color of the investor and the investor DNA also becomes important. I know in the beginning it's not possible, but therefore be frugal. So you're not compelled to raise any money from anybody on any terms.
Indeed, very very valuable suggestions, no, or guidance, I would say, for the startup kind of space, startup founders and partners. And you touched upon two keywords that I take is value creation over valuation any day, and it pays to focus more on value creation rather than the valuation. Not to say that valuation is not important, but value creation any day outweighs the valuation game. Thank
Valuation
you very
will
much.
follow if there is true value creation. If there is sustainable value creation, valuation will follow.
Will
I
follow.
mean,
Indeed.
the
Indeed.
principles of economics and market will work.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Mr. Basin, once again for sparing your time and participating in this episode of Startup Adda, and for your very, very valuable advice and the probing questions. Thank you very much once again. Best wishes to you.
Thank you. Enriching session. I learned a lot. Thank you, Shreyas. Thank you, Sumantra. Thank you, eTauto team. And thank you, everybody who's been on the call. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Thank you
And
so much.
before we end, Shreyas, what I want to understand is a little bit about you. You know, your full name is Shreyas Shibulal. How much of a difference has your second name made for you? Does that help you with something like a strong foundation to build your own story, quite different from your father's? By the way, to the audience, for those who may not be aware, Shreyas is the son of Mr. S.D. Shibulal, who, as we all know, is the co-founder and former CEO and MD of Infosys. Shreyas?
To be very honest, I think, of course, having indeed my father and other entrepreneurs in the family has definitely been a great asset, just in terms of being able to bounce off ideas and seek guidance. You asked the question about building my own story. Story is not something I really think about, or no, neither do I have the luxury of thinking about right now because I'm in the thick of it. Story is probably something that I'll have to reflect upon once the time comes. But I mean, I'm enjoying what I'm doing. I believe that we're making an impact in this space. And for now, that's really all I can say and all that I can hope for.
And is your dad your in-house advisor, consultant for all the critical?
Yeah, he works for free. So yeah, but yes, I see. I do seek a lot of guidance from him. Yes, absolutely.
Do convey our regards and best wishes to him as well. And Lastly, I believe you enjoy spending time once in a while at the racing circuit, especially at the Kali Motor Speedway at Coimbatore. Uh, the, Tell me how often do you go there? And as a driving enthusiast yourself, do you think an EV could provide an experience and thrill similar to that of a fossil fuel racing machines? An honest answer, Shreyas.
So, so first of all, I haven't had the opportunity to go back to Curry Speedway in a while. And I think I honestly just haven't found the time to do it. But I think, with regards to your second question, I was watching this episode. Jay Leno has this show on YouTube called Jay Leno's Garage. He was saying that he believes that what EVs will do for internal combustion vehicles will be kind of what internal combustion vehicles did for horse riding and the population of horses. Because before kind of the mass adoption of automobiles, the population of horses was really being affected in terms of the way they were being treated, and of course, the population was diminishing. And now, anything with regards to horses is, by and large, it's moved to more of a recreational activity, and also with regards to sports. And I think that is kind of what it will do, what perhaps electric vehicles will do to internal combustion vehicles, in some sense. Um, in the sense that, there will be maybe a more recreational use case, and that would be the predominant one, perhaps, especially for people who are enthusiasts of, antique cars and that entire space. All that being said, I think electric vehicles do. I don't think they will do enough to make a ride in an electric vehicle as thrilling and as filled with adrenaline as perhaps an internal combustion.
Of course, with those
But I
kind of
think people have
high
to be
torque
open to it.
characteristics.
People have to be open to it. I think of course you won't find everything. The noises will be different. The vibrations may not be there, or they might be there. So I think
Yes.
it's just a matter of being open-minded.
Indeed, it's a matter of being open-minded, and it's interesting to hear you talking about you using the analogy of racing no, horses, uh, and in fact, on another show on ET Auto, a very highly revered industry veteran used the same analogy that as things progress, yes, the high torque characteristics of EVs may provide you the fun and all, but the certain inherent characteristics which are exclusive to a fossil fuel vehicle may not be there. So therefore, those who want to enjoy those characteristics may, like in the case of horses now, may go once in a while, take out those vehicles and indulge in a way, but indulge
Absolutely.
responsibly. That's very
Exactly.
but you're in your startup, you are doing anything but not racing machines. You are going to deliver goods and build up and help others build up their stories. So it's not with all the best wishes from us at Team ET Auto, wishing everyone at Micelio Mobility all the very best. And we will, of course, at ET Auto keep tracking your story like we do with all the other developments in the industry. So wishing you, your team, and our loved ones all the very best.
Thank you so much, Sumantra. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. It was a pleasure having this almost an hour-long conversation with Shreyas Shibulal, founder and director of Micelio Mobility. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this discussion as much as I did conducting it. So, wishing you and your loved ones all the very best. Take care and stay safe, and goodbye. From all of us at Team ET Auto, wishing you all the very best.